Well, last time I talked a little bit about test equipment and had this line, you can't lose a lead, you don't need batteries, whatever. And I looked, I was in Germany at the time of the last meeting. I looked for a few of those over there, 'cause that's where mine came from originally. Didn't find anything cheap. So when you think of cheap tools, you think of Harbor Freight. And sure enough, Harbor Freight carries them. Right now they're 30% off. This would cost you $14. And you can tell it's a European one because it ends at 400 volts instead of 480 like God intended it to be. So,
Yeah, but they start out at 220.
yes. And we spoke about ignition systems. Does anybody have a competition Triumph? Something that ends in a C. Okay, well that is the exception to everything. There's no rectifier on it because it runs the lights and everything AC. The points fire on closing instead of on opening, and you've got 3 advanced settings, which you do by unbolting the alternator and turning it to the next set of holes. There's a real good, if you do a search online, there's more than a few people that have set those up. I've got a T100C.
Mine's actually got a competition mag.
Okay. All right. I think we finished with the ignition and kind of moved to charging systems. Does that sound right? Page 4.
Yep.
Okay, and we kind of covered a little bit on polarization. British bikes like to use a capacitor to help smooth out the fine ripples in the DC power after it's rectified. I just discovered all kinds of new stuff in my garage. So there's the old style rectifier block with a capacitor. I can pass any of this stuff around if anybody want to look at it. It's bagged for your health. But they use, find the right bag here. They use what's called a Zener diode to clamp the DC voltage down where it's high enough to charge the battery, but low enough that it won't burn the bulbs out. And did a little looking. Evidently, Lucas, this is the Zener diode. It's grounded and it has one attachment for the plus, well, for the minus supply if we're looking at British with the positive ground.
So that's a heat sink around it.
It's a heat sink. Keep things. If you pull, what it does is it limits the voltage. In order to do that, it has to shed some power, so it gets hot. So they put a heat sink on it. There's bullet-shaped ones, and different kinds. The Zener, I was looking online. Evidently, Lucas sold their remaining spares to somebody, and so a few years back there was a number of these available. Now the going price seems to be $120 for a new one. I looked and said, well, you know, there's got to be some other supplier that could do it, but with the positive ground it's a little rarer. I could get, instead of a 20 wire, I could get a 10 watt for $35. But I had, because of the positive ground, I would have to have ordered 1,000 of them.
So let me, so when you go to an alternator, you're generating AC current, right? And
Right.
I noticed Lucas's went to basically a combination regulator, rectifier to turn it to DC, right?
Well, they used a rectifier to turn it to DC, and then the Zener diode to clamp the voltage to keep it from going too high. So it's kind of this two-state system. And for years, people have been doing something else with them. I think these guys are defunct now. I didn't find any trace of Mighty Max, Podtronics, and in fact, I've read where people get good results with a cheap Japanese or Chinese 4-wire, 2 for the AC in, 2 for the DC out. You see a lot of them that are 3-wire, and that's for a negative ground system. So you can't use that on a Triumph unless you're willing to make everything, change the whole thing over. So
How hard is it to convert one over to negative ground like God intended?
you take that out of the system, you switch the wires at the battery.
That's it, right?
That's about it.
I don't understand why you just do that.
Well, didn't Podtronics still makes a rectifier regulator?
Right, they do. And said you can get that's a hefty little piece there.
Now it's about this big.
Oh. But you can, now this is all the rectifier that you would need. This replaces that spider looking one in the bag. Does anybody need something to take notes with?
Thank you.
Take one. Pass it. So this is a modern rectifier with its own heat sink. Came out of a audio amp, and it's good for, I don't know, 12 amps, something like that, 12, 15 amps. Just
How would you determine that, what it's good for?
Well, you crank it up till it smokes, and then you buy a new one.
There you go. Oh, I need a bigger one.
Calvin and Hobbes, go, Dad, how do they get the weight limit on those bridges? How do they know what to put on there? Well, they build the bridge and they run heavier and heavier trucks over it till it breaks, and then they make the sign and fix the bridge.
So much weight, huh?
All right, Zener voltage regulator.
What's the series?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's pretty much the charging system. Then we go into lighting. Headlight, and my notes say that's the home of the wiring rat's nest. They shoved every wire they could think of inside the headlight shell. And one of our problems is that we like to see and be seen, so we like to put bigger bulbs in and stress the system. If you can get a replacement LED bulb, that's good for 2 reasons. You get more light for your money, and it won't go out on you nearly as often as a filament bulb with the vibration.
Don't they create a lot of heat though?
Not the LEDs.
Not the LED.
Regular bulb is 90% heat, 10% light, and you're running high 80s to 90% efficient on an LED bulb. Tail lights. So I had 66 BSA Lightning. I was living in Iowa, and I took it in to be inspected. And the guy comes out in a lab coat with his clipboard, No. First thing he wanted was a high beam indicator light. He didn't have a high beam indicator light. So he never had one. I don't need to have one. Or you have to have one. I said, okay, I'll go to Radio Shack, I'll buy a little light, and I'll black tape it on the Speedo, and as soon as we're done, I'll take it off and throw it away if that's all it's going to take to make you happy. So he'd already made me mad, and then he's checking, holds his clipboard behind the bike, squeezing the front brake. That's okay. He starts pushing with his foot. Oh, well, the stoplight doesn't work. The foot brake. I said, no, that's the shifter. So,
Did you chuckle?
more than he did.
That thing wasn't running, huh?
Yeah, really. It's just a light bulb. There's nothing major to be done with that. Turn signals. Used to be life was simple. You had a little can, you had 2 spade connectors on it, you plugged it in. If it flashed too fast, you got a heavy duty one and plugged in. And if you put a trailer on it, then you've got a heavy duty one. I don't know many people that pull major trailers with turn signals on them with a bike, so. Then we came to LED turn signals. And it doesn't want to flash right because there isn't enough load on it. So you end up putting a resistor in parallel with the light so it can load up the flasher and make it think it's putting out the right voltage. And how do you figure what size resistor to add? Well, you go on the internet and try to find your bike and see if somebody's changed it out. But you don't know what they're pulling in the LED turn signal that you're getting from China or Thailand. So it can be a little bit of experimentation. Just remember, you got 12 volts there. If you want to bleed off a little power, you need something with some mass to it because the resistor just converts that to heat. So you can't use a little bitty, you know,
Resistor?
yeah, instead of a 10 ohm, you know, that's this long, a quarter watt, you want a 5 watt or so resistor so it can take some load, put some load on the turn signal circuitry and not burn itself up.
Where do you buy this stuff? They're like resistors and stuff like that.
Everything comes from Amazon, I thought.
Pardon?
Everything comes from Amazon, I thought.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
There's a pretty good electronic supply house about 35th and Main Street on the west side.
yeah. Radio Shack and all of them are gone.
No, it's not a Radio Shack, it's, I don't remember what it is.
It's Kansas City Electronic Supply. Yeah.
Good to know.
I got an antenna here for my TV, but.
I've got some spark plug caps, you know, I'm real excited about them because I say champion and all that stuff. And now all of a sudden I see where they got resistors built into the spark plug caps. So I'm going like, I don't know how that's going to work with a magneto.
Doesn't work with a dam on a Motor Guzzi because I fooled with them.
Is
And
that,
it burns them things up right away.
so does that, the resistor in there, I don't know.
It's in there for high frequency suppression, radio suppression, so it doesn't interfere with radios and computers and everything else nearby. They came into being, the resistor style caps, in the 60s on cars. So if you got something old, you know, you don't need it. And if you got something newer, 70s or whatever, it's not going to hurt anything, and it certainly you can run a cap without a resistor.
So I guess my question is, if I try to use those, especially on a magneto, does that
I don't
change
know.
the performance?
The BMWs run a magneto system, and I've run resistance caps with them.
And it doesn't seem to make a difference.
They prefer non-resistance caps, but I'd measure and see they're probably just like 1 k ohm or something.
Yeah, they're pretty low. I just didn't
They'll work.
even know the purpose for them, you know?
Well, to kill the radio frequencies.
Yes, RF suppression.
If
You're
FCC
trying to run a radio on your vehicle, you might need the resistor.
I'm lucky to steer it.
I'd be happy with one that ran.
There you go.
I've limited my choices now. I have a boot on my right foot, so I need more than that one electric start bike that I have. The horn.
As a result of the timing not quite correct on the bike he's kicking.
The Norton got me. Just like lights, you know, we love to have loud horns, if period appropriate. Put that out for people. And you can, you know, since it's not on continuously like a light, you can get by with a good sized horn without hurting anything, as long as it doesn't.
That just because they pull so much juice.
Pull so much juice, and so many bikes came with 2 of them, and so when we upgraded to whatever brand, the beautiful set that I was going to throw away because they weren't right for the Norton they came with, and then I heard them for the first time. I thought, oh, it sounds like a truck. I'm keeping these.
Actually work.
Are there? I've gone through the sheet pretty much. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Back to your inspection there in Iowa. What if you have an old bike before they had put turn signals on? Would they be grandfathered in, or would you have to put turn
Well,
signals on?
it's grandfathered in. And what you really need to know, in the back here, the last page is a schematic. The page before it has some references. And the Kansas vehicle statutes tell you effective what date things had to happen. So every motorcycle after, I think it was January 1st, 1974, has to have turn signals, or had to have turn signals to be sold. So if you have a 73, you don't need it. If you got a 74, it was required by law.
It also goes on to, continues to say too, though, that even though it's earlier vehicle vintage than that, if it came with original turn signals, it still must have them.
No, it doesn't say that.
Well, it doesn't say that. Oh, okay. All right, understood.
You still could take them off, or not?
I've got a 70 Triumph. That was the first year that they put them on as standard. And according to Kansas, I don't have to have them operable because they weren't required until 1974. Once something is required, then it stays. But
That's just mirrors and that kind of
mirrors and that kind of thing. You look like you have a question.
Me?
Yeah.
I got a lot of questions. I got a lot of questions.
Always deer in the headlights.
Yes.
A question about coils. It says here that, to check them, a good coil should have about 5 ohms. Does that change with the different voltage of coils? If you're going from a 12 to a 6-volt coil?
Well, yes, and
If you have a CDI, it changes. If you have electronic, it changes.
if you have a ballast resistor or not, it changes. The reason ballast resistors came into existence, they basically were for motorcycles, not for cars. Basically, they had enough 6-volt coils and everybody was happy with them, so we can use those 6-volt coils if we just add a resistor. or a 12-volt system. And you can do a look online, you know, everything you want to know. You'll get 3 or 4 conflicting opinions about it. But
So if you're testing a 6-volt coil, for instance, I mean.
if you're testing a 6-volt coil, you should get around single-digit, low single-digit ohms.
Okay.
What I don't know is, I'm familiar with any of them partially failing inside where the winding's short. Mostly they open.
If the secondary shorts or opens, you're gonna get either very low readings and you won't get a spark, or you're not gonna get anything at all. If the primary fails, open, of course you're not gonna get any ohm reading. If the primary fails short, you're gonna get a low reading and you won't get you get a very poor spark. It'll barely jump a spark plug. It won't work in the engine.
Right, because it can't take the pressure.
Yeah, it can't take compression pressure.
Okay.
But on coils, you've got 3 different kinds. I'm jumping in here, I'm trying to remember exactly. But ohm readings on coils, we're talking primary side only. Depending on, again, newer bikes, we can have, with points, it'll have one certain reading. With a CDI, it takes a totally different reading. And CDIs were only in the middle 70s for about 5 years, maybe.
And they take a high rise rate coil.
Yeah, they get a different coil. They can't switch. If you have electronic ignition, it takes a little different reading on the ohm. You want a lower ohm reading because they put out a higher spark. I'm sorry, higher ohm reading on electronic.
So, in general, know what you got before you start looking. There are a lot of 2-cylinder coils that jump the gap of 2 spark plugs simultaneously.
Wasting spark.
Yeah, one of which you didn't need until the next time around. Okay,
I got a question about spark plugs. So what, I mean, besides oil fouling, then like, how do they foul from like fuel? Because I've seen them like an engine will flood and then the spark plug will
If
foul.
you get wet.
Yeah, but even after they dry out, it seems like they won't work right.
well, that shouldn't be a problem with a gas engine. If you're just getting gas in the cylinder, you take the plug out
When it dry.
and my automatic reaction was you take the plug out and you kick it a few times. Dry it off and try again. Obviously running too rich, you'll get a blackened plug. And I point out in here, if we ever find somebody like Pat who wants to do one of these on spark plugs, you could spin a whole, get ready. Last time I volunteered for something was this, Before that, I ended up in Africa for 1.5 years for a minimum.
We're getting Bill around down here. He's doing spark plugs, the Japanese plugs.
Okay.
But on plugs, yeah, I know what this guy's talking about. They get wet, and for some reason they don't want to fire. I don't know why. Basically, I've been reading on that. One guy says it leaves deposits, it soaks the insulator, and they just don't want to fire right. I can't tell you much more than that, but I'm like you. I've got one that flooded, and the damn thing will not start again. You put new plugs in it, she fires right up. You say, "What the hell's wrong?" The plug looks good.
You wonder if you,
For the champion plug?
I've done it. I can. NKC, like I said, NGK, whatever they are. Yeah. Japanese man, they need
yeah, I don't know if you need to take them out and bake them like you do welding electrodes. Something to try.
Or you hit them with a little Prepsol or a little bit of some kind of a solvent solution spray that's quick drying, and quite often that'll clean them up.
But why would they get wet? You take them out, you dry them off, you blow them off, and they still don't want to fire one. Why is
Lighter
that?
thinner and a cigarette lighter. Hang 'em up.
Just the way it is.
It's just the way it is.
That's the way
One of those mysteries of life.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna solve that for anybody today. Unless there's more questions, conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.